The lecture hall buzzed with the nostalgic energy of alumni reconnecting at the law school's 10th reunion. Champagne flutes clinked, laughter echoed across the marble floor and beneath the crystal chandeliers. Old classmates reminisced about their days in mock trials and late-night study sessions. Among them, Min Kwan, now a respected law professor at the same institution, navigated through the crowd with practiced ease, offering polite smiles and brief handshakes. He wasn't particularly fond of such gatherings, but as faculty, his presence was expected. The familiar faces brought back memories of his student days, some pleasant, others he'd rather forget. His eyes scanned the room, searching for a quiet corner where he could retreat, when a familiar laugh caught his attention. Across the hall stood Nian, her elegant black dress contrasting with the vibrant red of her lipstick. She was engaged in an animated conversation with former classmates, gesturing enthusiastically as she spoke. Even after all these years, her presence commanded attention, not through loudness but through a quiet confidence that Min Kwan had always admired from afar. They had been classmates, occasional study partners, but never quite close friends. Their paths had diverged after graduation, he into academia, she into the more practical side of law as a trainee attorney. Yet seeing her now stirred something in him, a curiosity about the road not taken. As if sensing his gaze, Nian looked up and their eyes met. A moment of recognition, followed by a warm smile that reached her eyes. She excused herself from her group and made her way toward him. "Professor Min Kwan," she said, extending her hand. "Still hiding in corners at social events, I see." "Trainee attorney Nian," he replied, taking her hand. "Still calling out my antisocial tendencies, I see." They both laughed, and just like that, the years between them dissolved. They found themselves at the bar, catching up over drinks, reminiscing about their time in law school, the demanding professors, the impossible exams, the moments of triumph and despair. "Remember Dr. Tran's constitutional law class?" Nian asked, her eyes sparkling with mischief. "You were the only one who dared to challenge his interpretations." Min Kwan winced at the memory. "And he made me pay for it during the final exam. I'm pretty sure he created a special question just to watch me struggle. Yet here you are, teaching at the same institution. Life has a strange sense of humor." "Speaking of humor," Min Kwan said, leaning closer, "how are you finding the trainee attorney life? All those hours billable yet?" Nian sighed, twirling the stem of her glass. "It's challenging. The senior partners seem to believe sleep is a luxury I haven't earned yet. But worth it?" "Most days," she replied, her expression thoughtful. "Though sometimes I wonder if I should have followed your path instead. Teaching seems calmer." Min Kwan laughed. "Trust me, facing a lecture hall of law students who believe they already know everything is far from calm." As the evening progressed, they moved from the bar to a small table in the corner, their conversation flowing effortlessly from professional aspirations to personal philosophies. Min Kwan couldn't remember the last time he'd felt so at ease with someone, so free to express his thoughts without fear of judgment. The background noise of the reunion faded as they created their own bubble of conversation, laughing over shared memories and debating recent legal developments. It was during one such debate, about the recent legislative changes that had been making headlines, that their conversation took an unexpected turn. "The new marriage law is ridiculous," Min Kwan said, shaking his head. "The idea that verbal agreements can constitute binding contracts without traditional documentation. It's going to create chaos in the courts." "It's progressive," Nian countered. "It recognizes that commitment isn't always about paperwork. Sometimes it's about what people say and mean in the moment." But that's precisely the problem. How do you prove what someone meant in the moment? Words can be misinterpreted, taken out of context. Nian leaned forward, her eyes challenging. Are you saying people shouldn't be held accountable for their words, that promises should be easy to break? Of course not, Min Quan replied, feeling a familiar thrill at their intellectual sparring. I'm saying that intent matters, and contextual understanding is crucial. A joke, a hypothetical, these shouldn't be legally binding. So you're the type who makes casual promises with no intention of keeping them, Nian teased, raising an eyebrow. I'm the type who believes in clarity and proper legal procedure, he retorted. Their debate attracted the attention of nearby classmates, who gradually gathered around their table, adding their opinions to the mix. The discussion grew livelier, voices raised in friendly argument, glasses refilled as the night deepened. It was well past midnight when the dean of the law school, slightly tipsy from the evening's indulgence, called for everyone's attention. He stood on a small platform at the center of the hall, microphone in hand, ready to deliver the closing remarks of the reunion. Before we end this wonderful evening, he announced, I'd like to invite some of our distinguished alumni to share a few words about how their legal education has shaped their careers. To Min Quan's horror, the dean called his name first. Reluctantly, he made his way to the platform, acutely aware of all eyes on him. Public speaking was part of his daily routine as a professor, yet something about addressing his former classmates made him unusually nervous. He cleared his throat and began with a standard reflection on the value of legal education, the importance of ethics in practice, the responsibility that came with their profession. As he spoke, his eyes found Nian in the crowd, her encouraging smile giving him confidence. Feeling emboldened, perhaps by the late hour or the several glasses of champagne, he decided to end with a light-hearted reference to their earlier debate. And as we've been discussing tonight, the law continues to evolve in surprising ways, he said, looking directly at Nian. Take the new marriage legislation. It suggests that our words, even in jest, might be more binding than we realize. The crowd chuckled, and Min Quan, riding the wave of their approval, made a theatrical gesture toward Nian. So perhaps we should all be careful what we say, he continued, a playful smile on his lips. For instance, if I were to say to our brilliant trainee attorney Nian right now, he paused for dramatic effect, dropping to one knee in an exaggerated proposal stance, marry me? I might find myself legally bound. The hall erupted in laughter and applause at his theatrical display. Min Quan, pleased with his successful conclusion, stood up and took a mock bow. But before he could step away from the microphone, Nian's voice rang out clear across the hall. Yes! The laughter doubled, everyone assuming she was playing along with the joke. Min Quan smiled, giving her an appreciative nod for adding to the entertainment. What none of them realized was that among the audience were two judges from the Supreme Court and the Minister of Justice, all of whom were, according to the new legislation, qualified legal witnesses to what had just transpired. The evening concluded shortly after, with the alumni dispersing into the night with fond farewells and promises to keep in touch. Min Quan and Nian parted ways with a friendly hug, both feeling they had reconnected in a meaningful way. Neither of them suspected that their playful exchange would come back to haunt them, that a joke shared between old friends would soon become the center of a legal storm that would test not only their understanding of the law but their understanding of themselves. The morning after the reunion, Min Quan woke with a mild hangover and the pleasant lingering memory of reconnecting with Nian. He was preparing his lecture notes for the day when his phone rang. It was the dean, his voice uncharacteristically urgent. Hey, Min Quan, we need to talk. There's been an unexpected development from last night's event. What kind of development? Min Quan asked, a sense of unease growing in his stomach. It's about your proposal to Nian. My what? That was clearly a joke in the context of discussing the new marriage law. The dean cleared his throat uncomfortably. Yes, well, that's the problem. The new law that you were so cleverly referencing? It officially came into effect at midnight last night, and according to its provisions, a verbal proposal and acceptance in the presence of qualified legal witnesses constitutes a binding marriage contract. Min Quan felt the blood drain from his face. But that's absurd. It was obviously in jest, part of my speech. I understand that, but the legislation is quite clear. And with 2 Supreme Court judges and the Minister of Justice present as witnesses. This can't be happening, Min Quan muttered, his mind racing. There must be some way to invalidate it. It wasn't a genuine proposal. That's what we need to discuss, the dean said gravely. The law does allow for annulment under certain conditions, but it requires both parties to agree. And there's another complication. The media got wind of it. The media? Min Quan nearly dropped his phone. How? One of the students recorded your speech and the, proposal. It's already trending online. Law professor accidentally marries former classmate under new marriage law. The irony is too delicious for them to ignore. Min Quan closed his eyes, trying to process the surreal situation. Have you spoken to Nian about this? Not yet. I thought you might want to be the one to reach out to her. After ending the call, Min Quan sat in stunned silence. How could a theoretical example used to illustrate a point have spiraled into this? He needed to contact Nian immediately, to explain the misunderstanding and hopefully laugh about the absurdity of it all before arranging for the annulment. But before he could call her, his phone buzzed with a notification. It was a news alert with his name in the headline, Accidental Marriage at Law School Reunion, When Legal Theory Becomes Personal Reality. With growing horror, he opened the article to find a photo of himself on one knee before Nian. Microphone in hand, with her smiling response captured in the next frame. The article detailed how the foremost critic of the new marriage legislation had become its first high-profile case, quoting legal experts who called it a poetic application of the very law he had been questioning. As he scrolled through the comments, his phone rang again. It was Nian. I assume you've seen the news, she said without preamble, her voice unreadable. Nian, I'm so sorry about this, he began. It was a hypothetical example, not a real proposal. We need to get this annulled immediately. There was a pause on the other end. Is that what you want? She asked finally. The question caught him off guard. Well, yes, I mean, we can't possibly be married. It was a joke. Of course it was, she replied, her tone cooling. I was playing along. But the situation is more complicated now. What do you mean? My family saw the news, she explained. They're ecstatic. My mother has already called every relative announcing my marriage to a respected law professor. My grandmother, who's been ill, is suddenly full of energy planning a reception. Min Quan felt a knot forming in his stomach. But surely they'll understand when you explain it was a misunderstanding. Another pause, longer this time. The thing is, Min Quan, I'm not sure I want to explain it away just yet. What are you saying? I'm saying that maybe we should take a moment to consider our options before rushing to annul everything. This situation, bizarre as it is, might be an opportunity. An opportunity for what? He asked, bewildered. For both of us to reassess some things. Last night, before your dramatic proposal, we were having a genuine connection. Why not explore that further? Besides, from a legal perspective, this case could set an important precedent for the interpretation of the new law. Min Quan couldn't believe what he was hearing. Are you suggesting we stay legally married as some kind of experiment? I'm suggesting we don't make hasty decisions. Let's meet and discuss this properly. If nothing else, we're both lawyers. We should approach this methodically." Before he could respond, she added, "I have to go into a meeting now. Let's have dinner tonight and talk through our options. Your accidental wife will text you the details." The line went dead, leaving Min Kwan staring at his phone in disbelief. What had started as a theoretical debate had somehow morphed into a personal crisis, with Nian, practical, rational Nian, suggesting they remain in a marriage that was never meant to exist. As he tried to gather his thoughts, his phone buzzed again with more notifications. Messages from colleagues, former classmates, even students, all reacting to the news of his marriage. Some were congratulatory, others teasing, a few expressing concern about the legal implications. One message in particular caught his eye, from his mother. "Son, when were you planning to tell me you got married, and to think I had to find out from Mrs. Dow at the market? Bring your wife for dinner this Sunday. No excuses." Min Kwan groaned, burying his face in his hands. How had a simple academic example spiraled so completely out of control? And more puzzlingly, why wasn't Nian as eager as he was to rectify the situation? With a growing sense of dread, he realized that untangling this mess would be far more complicated than he had initially thought. This wasn't just about filing for annulment. It was about navigating family expectations, public perception, and Nian's unexpectedly ambivalent stance. And underneath it all was a question he wasn't ready to confront. Why had he chosen that particular example, that particular person, for his hypothetical proposal? As the day progressed, Min Kwan found it impossible to concentrate on his lectures. His students, having seen the news, peppered him with questions about the marriage law and his own situation, turning what should have been a lesson on property rights into an impromptu discussion on marriage contracts. By the time evening arrived, bringing with it his scheduled dinner with Nian, Min Kwan was mentally exhausted. He arrived at the restaurant, a quiet, upscale place known for its privacy, 15 minutes early, needing time to compose himself. Nian arrived precisely on time, dressed in a professional suit that suggested she had come directly from work. As she slid into the seat across from him, Min Kwan noticed the absence of a wedding ring on her finger and felt oddly relieved. "Before you say anything," she began, "I want to clarify that I'm not suggesting we actually remain married in the traditional sense. I'm proposing a strategic approach to this situation." Min Kwan raised an eyebrow. "I'm listening." "The new marriage law is untested," she explained. "Our case could be the first major interpretation of its provisions. As legal professionals, we have a unique opportunity to shape how this legislation is understood and applied in the future. By staying accidentally married? By treating this as a case study," she corrected. "We document our experience, the legal proceedings, the social implications. It could be invaluable research, perhaps even the basis for an academic paper or a precedent-setting case." Min Kwan leaned back, studying her. "That's your legal mind talking. But there's something else, isn't there? You mentioned your family." A flicker of vulnerability crossed Nian's face before she composed herself. "My grandmother is very traditional. She's been worried that I'm too focused on my career, that I'll end up alone. When she heard about our marriage, it was the happiest I've seen her in years. She's been ill." Min Kwan. "The doctors weren't optimistic, but now she's making plans to attend our wedding reception. So you want to maintain this charade for your grandmother's sake?" "Not a charade," she insisted. "A temporary arrangement. We stay legally married for a short period, say 3 months. We document the experience from a legal perspective. I give my grandmother something to look forward to, and then we can file for an annulment based on our findings. Min Quan ran a hand through his hair, trying to process her proposal. And during these 3 months, what exactly would this arrangement entail? We wouldn't have to live together or anything like that, Nian assured him quickly. We'd simply attend a few family functions as a couple, cooperate on the legal documentation, and maintain the appearance of exploring our accidental marriage in good faith. And what about our professional reputations? I'm a law professor who inadvertently got caught in the very legislation I was critiquing. You're building a career at a prestigious firm. Won't this arrangement complicate things? Nian shook her head. On the contrary, I think it could enhance our professional standing. You become not just a critic of the law, but someone who experienced its application firsthand, giving you unique insight. And for me, being involved in such a high-profile case could accelerate my career progression. Min Quan had to admit there was a certain logic to her argument, though he suspected there were emotional factors she wasn't acknowledging. Still, the idea of being legally bound to someone, even temporarily, made him deeply uncomfortable. I don't know, Nian. This seems like an elaborate solution to what should be a simple problem. Couldn't we just explain the truth and file for immediate annulment? We could, she conceded. But consider the implications. We'd be establishing that verbal agreements made in jest have no legal standing under the new law, potentially undermining its entire purpose. Is that really the precedent you want to set? He hadn't considered that angle. As someone who had criticized the legislation for its potential to create exactly this kind of confusion, would he be proving his own point by seeking annulment? Or would he be undermining the seriousness with which verbal commitments should be treated? I need time to think about this, he said finally. Of course, Nian replied, reaching across the table to briefly touch his hand. But not too much time. The media attention is only going to intensify, and the longer we wait to respond, the more it will seem like we're either embracing or rejecting this marriage. As they finished their dinner, discussing the practical aspects of her proposal, Min Quan found himself studying Nian with new eyes. He had always respected her intellect, enjoyed their debates, but he had never considered her as someone he might marry, accidentally or otherwise. Yet there was something compelling about her approach to this bizarre situation, a blend of pragmatism and sensitivity, legal acumen and personal consideration. Instead of panicking or demanding an immediate annulment, she had analyzed the situation from multiple angles and proposed a solution that addressed both their professional interests and her family's emotional needs. Was this not, in its own way, an admirable quality in a partner? The ability to find opportunity in crisis, to balance legal minds with human hearts? All right, he said as they were preparing to leave. 3 months. We document everything from a legal perspective, attend necessary family functions, and then reassess. Nian's smile was equal parts relief and triumph. A contract, then. Shall we draft terms? Naturally, he replied with a wry smile. Though given our current situation, perhaps we should be careful about what we put in writing. They both laughed, and for a moment, the tension that had hung between them all evening dissolved. Whatever came of this strange arrangement, Min Quan realized they would at least have their shared legal perspective and sense of irony to see them through. As they parted ways outside the restaurant, Nian hesitated, then reached up to straighten his slightly crooked tie. For what it's worth, she said softly, there are worse people to be accidentally married to. Before he could respond, she had turned and walked away, leaving him to wonder if this strategic approach might lead them places neither had anticipated in their careful planning. News of the accidental marriage spread rapidly, evolving from legal curiosity to media sensation. By the end of the week, Min Quan and Nian had been featured in national newspapers, legal journals, and morning talk shows, with commentators debating the implications of their case for the new marriage legislation. Some celebrated it as proof of the law's effectiveness in recognizing verbal commitments. Others cited it as evidence of the law's dangerous imprecision. Legal experts weighed in on the technicalities. Social commentators on the cultural significance, and relationship columnists on the romantic potential of their unusual situation. Through it all, Min-Kwan and Nian maintained their agreed-upon narrative. They were approaching their accidental marriage as both legal professionals and individuals, taking time to understand the full implications before deciding their next steps. This measured response only fueled public interest. There was something captivating about two legal minds caught in the machinery of the very system they had helped shape, now navigating its personal consequences with professional detachment. The first test of their arrangement came the following Sunday. Dinner with Min-Kwan's parents. As they drove to his family home in the suburbs, Min-Kwan briefed Nian on what to expect. "My mother will be thrilled regardless of the circumstances," he explained. "She's been not so subtly hinting that I should settle down for years. My father will be more reserved. He's a retired judge, so he'll be interested in the legal aspects, but he's also very traditional about marriage." "Should we tell them the truth?" Nian asked. "That this was an accident and we're treating it as a case study?" Min-Kwan considered this. "Let's see how the evening unfolds. I don't want to lie to them, but explaining that we're in a temporary legal experiment might be more complicated than letting them think we're exploring a relationship that happened to begin unusually." Nian nodded, then asked the question that had been hovering unspoken between them. "And what exactly are we exploring, Min-Kwan?" He kept his eyes on the road, aware of her gaze on him. "I'm not sure yet," he admitted. "A legal case study, certainly, but also, I've enjoyed reconnecting with you. Whatever else this situation is, it's given us a reason to spend time together again." From the corner of his eye, he saw her smile. "A silver lining to our legal cloud." The dinner went better than Min-Kwan had anticipated. His mother, as predicted, was overjoyed, embracing Nian warmly and immediately treating her as part of the family. His father, after his initial surprise, engaged Nian in a thoughtful discussion about her work and aspirations. "You've chosen a challenging path," he observed over dessert. "Private practice requires dedication, especially for young women in our legal system." "It does," Nian agreed, "but it also offers opportunities to effect real change, case by case." The retired judge nodded approvingly. "A practical approach. My son prefers to change minds through teaching, shaping the next generation of lawyers. Different methods, but perhaps complementary aims." Min-Kwan watched this exchange with interest. His father had never been easy to impress, yet Nian seemed to have gained his respect within hours. There was something gratifying about seeing her integrate so smoothly into his family dynamics, even if their arrangement was temporary. As the evening progressed, Min-Kwan found himself sharing anecdotes about their law school days, stories he'd almost forgotten. Nian standing up to an intimidating professor, her brilliant argument in a mock trial, the time they'd stayed in the library until dawn preparing for finals. "Yet you never told me these stories," his mother said, delighted by these glimpses into her son's past. "I hadn't thought about them in years," Min-Kwan replied honestly, catching Nian's eye across the table. By the time they left, laden with leftovers and warm farewells, something had shifted between them. The careful professional distance they'd maintained had softened, tinged with genuine affection and shared history. "Your parents are wonderful," Nian said as they drove back to the city. "Your mother hugged me 3 times and made me promise to visit again soon. She's already planning our wedding reception, isn't she?" complete with traditional ceremonies and custom invitations. Nian confirmed with a laugh. I didn't have the heart to tell her about our 3-month timeline. Min Quan frowned slightly. Does that bother you? The expectations we're creating. Nian was quiet for a moment. Sometimes, but then I think about my grandmother's happiness, the legal insights we're gaining, and... She hesitated. The chance to know you better. It seems worth the temporary complications. As they reached the city, Min Quan found himself reluctant to end the evening. Coffee? He suggested, gesturing toward a late-night cafe they used to frequent as students. Nian smiled. I'd like that. Over coffee. Their conversation drifted from family dynamics to professional aspirations, from memories to possibilities. It was past midnight when they finally parted, with plans to meet later that week to draft the formal documentation of their case. Walking to his apartment, Min Quan realized with a start that for hours, he had forgotten that their marriage was an accident, that their relationship was a strategic arrangement. For those hours, it had simply been two people reconnecting, enjoying each other's company, discovering new layers to a familiar connection. It was a dangerous blurring of boundaries, he knew. Their agreement was clear. This was a temporary legal exercise with practical benefits for both parties. Emotional entanglement would only complicate the inevitable conclusion. Yet, as he lay awake that night, he couldn't help but wonder if those boundaries had been artificial from the start. Their accidental marriage might have been unintended, but their connection, rekindled at the reunion, strengthened through this strange shared experience, felt increasingly authentic. The following weeks brought new challenges as Min Quan and Nian balanced their professional lives with the growing demands of their marriage. They established a routine of sorts, breakfast meetings twice a week to discuss legal developments in their case, occasional dinners with family or friends, and careful documentation of every aspect of their experience. At Nian's law firm, opinions were divided. Some partners saw her high-profile case as valuable publicity. Others worried it might distract from her casework. Nian navigated these concerns with characteristic diplomacy, demonstrating that her unusual marital situation was enhancing rather than hindering her legal insight. For Min Quan, the university environment proved both supportive and challenging. His colleagues in the law faculty were fascinated by the real-world application of the legislation they had been theoretically discussing. The dean, after his initial alarm, began to see the potential academic value in what he now called Professor Min's marriage case study. Students, however, were less academic in their interest. Lecture halls filled to capacity as undergraduates came to witness the professor whose accidental marriage had become a national talking point. Questions about property law or constitutional principles were interspersed with thinly veiled inquiries about his personal life. "Hey, Professor," one bold student asked during office hours, "do you think the court's interpretation of intent in marriage contracts will be influenced by public perception of your case?" Min Quan recognized the student's attempt to extract personal information under the guise of academic interest. "That's an excellent question for our discussion on judicial independence next week," he replied smoothly. "Please prepare a brief analysis of recent cases where media coverage may have influenced legal outcomes." The student left with a research assignment rather than the gossip he had hoped for, a pattern Min Quan had perfected over the weeks. While they managed the public aspects of their situation with professional composure, privately, the lines between their arranged partnership and genuine relationship continued to blur. Their legal discussions often gave way to personal conversations. Their documented family obligations became occasions they found themselves looking forward to. A month into their arrangement, they faced their first major challenge, an invitation to speak at a legal symposium on modern marriage contracts, where they would be expected to discuss their experience publicly for the first time. It's too soon, Minquan argued as they debated the invitation over lunch. We're still in the documentation phase. We haven't even decided our final position on the legal validity of what happened, which is precisely why our perspective would be valuable. Nian countered, We're not presenting conclusions, just insights into the process. Besides, this symposium will have significant influence on how the courts interpret cases like ours in the future. Cases like ours, Minquan repeated with a wry smile. How many accidental marriages do you think are happening out there? More than you might imagine, Nian said seriously. The legal aid clinic where I volunteer has received several inquiries from people caught in similar situations. Verbal agreements made in emotional moments, now being tested against the new legislation. This caught Minquan's attention. You didn't mention this before. I've been researching them privately, she admitted. These cases lack our legal training and public platform. If our experience can help establish clearer guidelines for how these situations are handled, don't we have a responsibility to share it? Her appeal to professional responsibility resonated with him. Whatever personal complications their arrangement had created, the legal implications extended far beyond them. All right, he conceded, and we'll do the symposium. But we present the facts objectively. No embellishment for dramatic effect. No hiding the experimental nature of our approach. Nian nodded, relief evident in her expression. Of course, strictly professional. As they continued planning their presentation, Minquan was struck by how naturally they worked together, Nian's practical perspective balancing his theoretical approach. Her attention to emotional nuance complementing his focus on legal principles. In another life, they might have made excellent law partners, or a voice in his mind suggested partners in a more personal sense. He pushed the thought away. Their arrangement had a clear expiration date, a fact he reminded himself of with increasing frequency as he found himself growing more attached to Nian's presence in his life. The day of the symposium arrived with unexpected complications. As they prepared to leave for the venue, Minquan received an urgent call from his father. A mother's in the hospital, he said, his voice tight with concern. Nothing life-threatening, but they're running tests. She's asking for you and Nian. Without hesitation, Minquan told Nian, We need to cancel the symposium. My mother's in the hospital. To his surprise, Nian immediately took charge. I'll contact the organizers and explain what you call a taxi. Which hospital? Within 20 minutes, they were on their way. The symposium forgotten as more pressing family concerns took precedence. At the hospital, they found Minquan's father pacing outside a treatment room, his usual judicial composure frayed with worry. Suspected heart irregularity, he explained. She was gardening and felt faint. The doctors are being cautious because of her age. Minquan felt a surge of gratitude when Nian took his father's hand, guiding him to a chair with gentle authority. Tell us exactly what the doctors have said so far, she prompted, her tone both respectful and firm. As his father recounted the medical details, Minquan watched Nian's focused attention, her thoughtful questions, the way she managed to be both compassionate and practical in a crisis. This wasn't part of their arrangement. There was no legal documentation happening here, no audience to perform for. This was simply Nian responding to his family's need as if it were her own. When they were finally allowed to see his mother, her face lit up at the sight of them. My son and his wonderful wife, she said, reaching for their hands. What a fuss over a little dizziness. Minquan started to correct her. Nian wasn't really his wife, not in the way she meant, but stopped himself. In this moment, technical distinction seemed less important than the comfort his mother took from their presence. The hours at the hospital stretched into evening. Tests were run, results discussed, a treatment plan established. Throughout it all, Nian remained by his side, handling practical matters when he was too worried to think clearly, asking medical questions he hadn't considered, ensuring his father ate something as they waited. It was nearly midnight when the doctors confirmed it had been a minor arrhythmia, treatable with medication and rest. The relief in the room was palpable as his mother was scheduled for discharge the following day. "You should both go home and rest," his father insisted. "I'll stay with her tonight." Outside the hospital, exhaustion hit them both. Min Quan turned to Nian, suddenly aware of how much he had leaned on her throughout the ordeal. "Thank you," he said simply, "for everything today. That wasn't part of our arrangement." Nian looked at him with something like hurt in her eyes. "Is that what you think? That I was following some contractual obligation?" "No, he began, but she continued. "Your parents have welcomed me into their home, shared their stories, treated me like family. Your mother has called me every other day just to chat. Did you think I wouldn't care when she was ill?" Min Quan was taken aback by her intensity. "I didn't mean to imply that. I know this situation isn't what you signed up for." "I didn't sign up for any of this," she reminded him softly. "We fell into it together, accidentally. But that doesn't mean the connections formed aren't real." The taxi arrived, breaking the moment between them. During the ride back to the city, they sat in thoughtful silence, both processing the day's events and their implications for their increasingly complicated arrangement. When they reached Nian's apartment building, Min Quan walked her to the entrance. Before he could say goodnight, she spoke. "I think we need to be honest about something, Min Quan. This hasn't been just a legal case study for weeks now, has it?" He met her gaze, knowing he could no longer deny what had been developing between them. "No," he admitted. "It hasn't." "So what is it?" she pressed. "What are we doing?" He took a deep breath. "I don't know exactly, but I know that today, when my mother was ill, you were the person I wanted beside me. Not as my accidental wife or legal partner, but as Nian. Just Nian." A smile slowly spread across her face, illuminated by the soft light of the entrance. "That's probably the most romantic thing you've ever said to me, which, admittedly, isn't saying much." He laughed, the tension between them easing. "I'm a law professor. Romance isn't exactly my specialty." "Maybe not," she agreed, stepping closer. "But you have other qualities that compensate." Before he could ask what those might be, she had risen on her tiptoes and pressed a gentle kiss to his cheek. "Good night, Min Quan. Call me when you have news about your mother." He watched her enter the building, his cheek warm where her lips had touched it, his mind racing with the implications of their exchange. Their carefully constructed arrangement was shifting, transforming into something neither of them had anticipated when they agreed to this experiment. And the most surprising realization was that he didn't want to stop it from happening. The following weeks brought significant developments in both their personal relationship and the legal aspects of their case. As they prepared documentation for what they now termed the accidental marriage precedent, they also began to acknowledge the genuine connection that had developed between them. Their professional meetings extended into personal dinners. Their formal documentation sessions ended with walks through the city or quiet conversations over tea. Without explicitly discussing it, they had begun to test what a real relationship between them might look like. This evolution did not go unnoticed. Colleagues observed their changing dynamic with interest. Friends commented on how natural they seemed together. Family members exchanged knowing glances when they thought the couple wasn't looking. 2 months into their 3-month arrangement, they received notification that a preliminary hearing had been scheduled to address the legal status of their marriage. The court, recognizing the potential precedent-setting nature of their case, had expedited the process. This is it," Nian said as they reviewed the notification in Min Kwan's office. "Our opportunity to formally present our findings and clarify the legal interpretation of verbal marriage contracts under the new legislation." Min Kwan nodded, but his mind was elsewhere. "Have you thought about what happens after the hearing?" he asked, trying to keep his tone casual. Nian looked up from the papers, her expression guarded. "Legally speaking or personally?" "Both," he admitted. "Our agreement was for 3 months, but the hearing is coming sooner than we expected. And you're wondering if our arrangement ends with the legal proceedings," she said, putting into words what he hadn't quite been able to ask. "I suppose I am." Nian set the documents aside and faced him directly. "What do you want to happen, Min Kwan?" It was the question he had been avoiding for weeks, the one that had kept him awake at night as he considered the possibilities. Their accidental marriage had become something neither of them had anticipated, a chance to discover what might have been if they had recognized their compatibility years ago. "I want," he began, then paused, choosing his words carefully. "I want to see where this goes, not as an experiment or a case study, but as us, just us, figuring out what we could be together." A smile slowly spread across Nian's face. "I was hoping you'd say that." Relief washed over him. "So you feel the same way? Why do you think I suggested this arrangement in the first place?" she asked, a hint of mischief in her eyes. "I saw an opportunity, not just for legal research, but to get to know the brilliant, frustrating man I've been curious about since law school." "Frustrating?" he repeated, raising an eyebrow. "Brilliantly frustrating," she amended with a laugh. "Always analyzing, questioning, looking for the logical angle, even when the answer might be sitting right in front of you, asking you to dinner." Min Kwan stared at her, realization dawning. "You mean back in law school? You were interested?" "For a while," she admitted. "But you were so focused on your academic pursuits. I didn't think you noticed anything else. And then our paths diverged, and the moment passed. Until I accidentally proposed in front of the entire legal community," he said wryly. "Until then," she agreed. "Which brings us back to the hearing. Regardless of our personal feelings, we still need to address the legal implications of what happened." Min Kwan nodded, forcing his mind back to the professional matters at hand. "So what position do we take? Do we argue that the marriage should be annulled because it was accidental, or validated because we've since embraced it?" "That's the question, isn't it?" Nian said thoughtfully. "Our case will likely influence how similar situations are handled in the future. We have a responsibility to consider the broader implications." They spent the rest of the afternoon debating the legal merits of various approaches, analyzing the potential precedents they might set, and preparing their documentation for the hearing. But underneath the professional discussion ran a current of personal understanding, whatever they decided legally. They had already made their decision about what came next for them personally. The day of the hearing arrived with considerable media attention. Journalists gathered outside the courthouse, legal commentators prepared to analyze the proceedings, and law students lined up for seats in the public gallery. What had begun as a private joke had evolved into a case that would help define the boundaries of the new marriage legislation. As Min Kwan and Nian arrived, they were greeted by both their families, a show of support that moved Min Kwan deeply. His mother, fully recovered from her health scare, embraced Nian warmly. Nian's grandmother, frail but determined, had traveled from her rural hometown to witness what she still believed was a formalization of their marriage. "She insisted on coming," Nian whispered to Min Kwan. "I couldn't tell her this might result in our marriage being annulled." Min Kwan squeezed her hand reassuringly. "Let's get through the legal proceedings first. Then we can discuss our next steps with both families. Inside the courtroom, they were surprised to find that rather than the administrative judge they had expected, a panel of 3 justices had been assigned to their case, a testament to its perceived importance in establishing legal precedent. The hearing began with a formal presentation of the facts, the context of Minquan's proposal, the witnesses present, the application of the new legislation to their situation. Legal experts were called to testify about the intent of the marriage law and its proper interpretation in cases where verbal agreements might be ambiguous. Throughout the morning, Minquan and Nian maintained their professional composure, responding to questions with careful consideration and legal precision. But as the proceedings continued, Minquan began to feel increasingly uncomfortable with the clinical dissection of what had become a deeply personal journey. During a brief recess, he pulled Nian aside. "This doesn't feel right," he said quietly. "We're discussing legal technicalities when the real story is about 2 people who found each other through an unexpected circumstance." Nian studied him thoughtfully. "What are you suggesting?" "I'm suggesting we stop approaching this as legal scholars and start approaching it as the people who actually lived this experience. The court needs to understand not just the legal facts but the human reality behind them." When the hearing resumed, Minquan requested permission to address the court directly. The presiding justice, intrigued by this departure from procedure, granted his request. Minquan stood, aware of all eyes upon him, the justices, the legal community, their families, and most importantly, Nian. "Your Honors," he began. "We have presented the technical details of our case, the words spoken, the witnesses present, the legal framework that transformed a joke into a marriage contract. But there's something missing from this analysis. Something that can't be captured in legal documentation or precedent reviews." He paused, gathering his thoughts. "The law exists to serve human needs, to provide structure and protection for human relationships. But it cannot predict or control how those relationships evolve. When I made that joking proposal at our reunion, I had no intention of creating a legal marriage. When Nian responded she was participating in what she understood to be a humorous exchange. Minquan turned slightly to include Nian in his address. Yet what began as an accident, a collision of words, timing, and legal technicalities became an opportunity. An opportunity to reconnect with someone I had always respected but never truly known. An opportunity to discover compatibility where I had only seen a colleague. An opportunity to recognize that sometimes the most meaningful commitments in our lives begin not with careful planning but with unexpected moments of truth. He faced the justices again, his voice growing more confident. "I stand before you not just as a law professor caught in a legal paradox, but as a man who has learned through this experience that intent is not static. It evolves. What began without matrimonial intent has developed into something genuine and meaningful. The question before this court isn't simply whether our accidental marriage was legally valid at its inception, but whether the law can recognize the transformation of intent that followed." The courtroom was silent as he continued. "If the purpose of the new marriage legislation is to acknowledge that commitment can be expressed through words and actions rather than just formal documentation, then surely it must also acknowledge that such commitment can develop over time. That what begins as accident can become choice." Minquan took a deep breath. "Your Honors, I am not asking you to validate our marriage because of a legal technicality. I am asking you to recognize that whatever began that night at the reunion has become something real, something worthy of legal recognition not because of the words spoken then, but because of the relationship built since." He looked at Nian, finding strength in her encouraging smile. "In conclusion, I would propose that this court consider a middle path. Neither immediate annulment nor automatic validation, but rather a period of legal recognition during which intent can be definitively established through actions rather than words alone. A probationary period, if you will, after which the parties can formalize their commitment or dissolve it based on informed choice rather than accidental circumstances. As he returned to his seat, Min-Kwan felt Nian's hand slip into his, her fingers intertwining with his own in a gesture that said more than words could express. The justices conferred briefly before the presiding judge addressed them. The court finds merit in Professor Min's suggestion. Given the unique circumstances of this case and its potential to establish precedent for future interpretations of the marriage legislation, we will order a 3-month legal recognition period, after which the parties may either formalize their marriage through traditional documentation or file for annulment without prejudice. She continued, "This approach acknowledges both the accidental nature of the initial contract and the possibility of genuine intent developing subsequently. It provides a balanced solution that respects both legal requirements and human realities." With a strike of her gavel, the hearing was adjourned, and Min-Kwan and Nian found themselves surrounded by their families, colleagues, and the press, all eager to understand the implications of the court's decision. But amidst the clamor, they exchanged a private look of understanding. The court had essentially formalized the arrangement they had already been living, giving them time to determine their path forward without the pressure of immediate decision. As they made their way through the crowd, Nian leaned close to whisper, "Was that speech part of our legal strategy, Professor, or something more personal?" "Both," he admitted. "The lawyer in me saw a logical solution to our legal predicament, but the man in me needed to express what these months have meant, what you have come to mean to me." Her smile was radiant as she squeezed his hand. "I believe that's the first time you've allowed your heart to argue alongside your legal mind." It was quite persuasive. "Persuasive enough?" he asked, a hint of vulnerability in his voice. "Let's just say," she replied softly, "that when our 3 months of legal recognition are up, I may be inclined to formalize rather than annul." Their families were waiting outside the courthouse, eager for explanation. Min-Kwan's mother embraced them both, while Nian's grandmother looked on with knowing eyes. "So the court has given you 3 months to decide if you want to stay married." Min-Kwan's father summarized after they had explained the ruling. "A sensible approach. Though I don't think it will take 3 months," Nian's grandmother said quietly, her weathered hand patting Min-Kwan's arm. "Some things an old woman can see clearly." As they stood together on the courthouse steps, surrounded by family and framed by the media's cameras, Min-Kwan realized how dramatically his life had changed since that fateful reunion. What had begun as a theoretical criticism of a new law had become a personal journey of discovery, about legal interpretation, yes, but more importantly, about connection, commitment, and the unexpected paths that lead us to where we're meant to be. The media dubbed their case the accidental marriage precedent. Legal journals analyzed its implications for future legislation, and law schools added it to their curriculum as a case study in the evolution of marriage contracts. But for Min-Kwan and Nian, the most significant outcome wasn't the legal precedent they had established, but the relationship they had discovered along the way. Their court-mandated 3 months of marriage recognition passed quickly, filled with moments that strengthened their connection. Family dinners, professional collaborations, quiet evenings discussing everything from legal philosophy to childhood dreams. They learned each other's habits, preferences, and histories, building a foundation far stronger than the accidental words that had brought them together. When the 3 months concluded, they faced their decision with clarity rather than confusion. There was no hesitation when they chose to formalize their marriage. no doubt when they exchanged vows in a simple ceremony attended by those who had supported them through their unusual journey. In his wedding speech, Min Quan referenced the irony of their situation with characteristic dry humor. "They say marriages are made in heaven," he told their gathered guests. "But ours was made in a law school reunion, witnessed by the Supreme Court, and validated by a legal precedent we accidentally created. Not the traditional path, perhaps, but one that taught us both that sometimes the best commitments are the ones we discover rather than the ones we plan." Nian's response captured the sentiment perfectly. As lawyers, we're trained to choose our words carefully, to understand their power and implications. But sometimes, the most meaningful words are those spoken without calculation, the ones that reveal truths we haven't yet acknowledged to ourselves. As they celebrated with their families and friends, Min Quan reflected on the strange series of events that had led them here. A theoretical criticism, a joking proposal, an unexpected response, each seemingly small moment creating a path neither had anticipated but both now embraced wholeheartedly. In the end, their case did help shape the interpretation of the new marriage legislation, establishing that verbal contracts must be evaluated not just for their technical compliance, but for the genuine intent behind them, intent that might evolve and clarify over time. But the more significant lesson, the one Min Quan would carry with him beyond legal precedents and academic papers, was personal rather than professional. That sometimes, the most profound commitments begin not with careful planning but with unexpected moments of truth. That what matters is not how a journey begins but how we choose to continue it. And that occasionally, the law, like life, must make room for the beautiful accidents that lead us where we need to be. And in the years that followed, whenever law students would ask about the famous accidental marriage case, Min Quan would share the legal details with professional precision. But he would always end with a personal observation that went beyond legal analysis. The law provides structure for human relationships, but it cannot predict or control how those relationships evolve. Sometimes, what begins as an accident becomes the most deliberate choice of all.